Welcome to Hacking the Truth. We will challenge you to question your beliefs while exploring the hidden agenda behind today's headlines. Hacking the Truth will bring untold secrets into the light and reveal truths never told before, while exposing those hiding in plain sight. And now, here are your hosts, James Trinkle Clements and Bob Wallace. Well, I'm here with Bob Wallace. How are you this morning, Bob?
I'm doing great, Jim.
And even though we can't see you, we know you're in the ethers, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it seems like we used to do stuff together. Then we watched each other on screens, and now we can't do it. We can't see anything.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to it soon. I guarantee it. Well, we talked about a number of things, and you mentioned what will life be like 20, 40 years from now from what it seems to be from where we've come in the last 50 to 60 years. It's been such drastic changes. But let's talk about what the future was thought it would be like when we were growing up or when we were coming of age in, just say, the 60s. I remember, we were going to be flying around in our own personal planes. There would be no cars. There would be no pollution. We'd have all this wonderful technology. We'd have robots. We wouldn't know what to do with all our leisure time. And we saw all these magnificent things like the Tomorrowland at Disney. How has that worked out for us?
Well, I think we've done pretty well on the technology front. The flying vehicle thing, I think, is still a ways off. I was surprised, but it made sense when it was explained to me. We will soon have trains and planes and boats that are just done by remote control. But it's going to be a long time before we have sort of self-driving cars because of the complexity of driving. So maybe we should be a little more sympathetic to those among us that have difficulty driving, because it really is hard to do. You have to keep track of all kinds of things at the same time.
Well, the technology in so many areas definitely has improved tremendously. I mean, what we're doing right now, doing a television show, and we used to do one in a studio, was very complicated as far as equipment. Now you can go on Amazon and buy yourself a studio for $1,000.
And one thing I've been watching, and that is how many changes are made in technology that improve products, and actually there's no notice of that given. There's no big advertising campaigns, nothing to show that it's been done, but those products are slowly getting better and better around us. It really is probably our proudest product of the last 50 years. And, one of the things I looked at when we were talking about doing forecasts of what would happen is just, how do you do that? And there's really two ways. And one is to take what's ever happening now and project it into the future. And probably the safest one to do that with is technology.
I think you're right. And because if you deal with climate, if you deal with society, that is a very finite moving target. It's hard to hit. It's hard to put a laser beam on it, because one thing like we've seen recently, COVID, can change everything, and it becomes so much more complex as far as society goes.
Well, the only thing I can say is, God forbid what would happen if we had another, I can't remember right now, the really highly fatal disease that they had in the Middle Ages.
Oh, okay, the Black Plague.
Yeah.
Bubonic plague, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where there's like 40 or 50% death rates. I mean, I think the whole world would collapse if that happened. Maybe we're lucky that it happened with something that is dangerous enough to make us take notice, and not so dangerous that we don't have a chance to learn about it and prepare for the next one. So that would be a question I'd have for you is, are we going to finally learn from history and learn to protect ourselves better and have better resources to deal with something that's much more serious than this present one, as serious as it is?
I think to a degree we will overall. I don't give us much hope. And the reason I say that, I've seen human nature deteriorate to a point of madness in the last 2 or 3 months. Not only with Black Lives Matter, but the minute we could get back outside from COVID, people were gathering without mask in mass and just say la vie, throw it to the wind, who cares? And so it wouldn't have made any difference if we would have stayed in another 2 months and gone back out. I think human nature is human nature. We're going to do what we want to do. And if anyone tells us what to do, we don't like it. Now, we can argue back and forth or the results of wearing masks, not wearing masks, what we should do. But I look at it more as how the population responds to certain stimulus. And so I don't give us much hope as a whole because I don't think we are growing more intelligent. I think we're growing less intelligent as a population.
You know, in that area, I think we're disproving evolution, don't you think?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And, you know, we've talked before about that, the notion that what we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, right? And what's really saying is human nature does not change. We tend to discredit what happened before. We say things like, well, it really was just a one-time event, or you know, we can handle the emergency now. We don't need to worry about it. All sorts of basically lies to ourselves that things are different now.
Well, let's look at something current. We've always said we'll never get into another Vietnam. Well, we are. And we've been there for what, 20 years?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's no doubt.
You cannot defeat an ideology. So you send these men and women over, and they just get mutilated and come back broken emotionally, physically. What have we accomplished? Nothing. So we didn't learn, did we?
Yeah, in the campaign to win the hearts and minds of the people in the Mideast and have remember, wasn't it called the Democratic Spring?
Yes.
That was going to happen. And I haven't heard about it recently in the news, but I would imagine it was an abject failure on all fronts.
Well, I remember
we talked. Go ahead.
Back when Vietnam was going on, and my friends were coming back, and they would say, "What are we doing? We keep taking the same hill. They bring us back. They ask us to go back." And one of my friends said, in talking to the locals that were on the communist side, he says, "Why do you follow the communists in the North? Why do you do that?" And the family said, "We will follow whoever will feed us. It's survival." We forget that.
Well, it's certainly we don't understand ourselves, and we certainly don't understand the cultures and the point of views of other people. And actually, one of my current trends that I thought would continue is just this, that the cyclical pattern of history repeating will continue to happen because we lack the awareness to learn from history.
Well, I mentioned a quote from Aristotle to you the other day, and it is, "Tolerance and apathy are the last virtues of a dying society." Boy, are we witnessing that right now?
Yeah, actually, that's, after we finish the current trend section, I would like to get into the cyclical nature, and that's what you're talking about. But there are some very clear indicators of a decline of a country or decline of an empire. And one of the greatest ones is the loss of virtue. Our virtues change from positive ones to really negative ones. And what's being championed now as the best virtue of all, which is tolerance of everything, except for the people we don't like, is very much in the head virtue of today.
And I like to lead into that with an article from Epoch Times, and that's a newspaper we get once a week, which I highly recommend. It's spelled EPOCH. Please go to the website, take a look at it. One of the best newspapers, and I used to be in the newspaper business, that I have seen. But it's by Alex Newman, and it's The Rise of the Federal Education System Accelerated the Demise of Real Education. I think if most Americans could read this article, they would have a greater understanding of what they've said about the dumbing down of America. And that was a book by the head of education in Ronald Reagan's cabinet, of how socialism and or Marxism, whatever you want to call it's got into our educational system, and we have definitely dumbed down America.
He does a very good job of explaining how the federal government took over the education of children from their parents, their local community, and their states. And it's not a novel story. The federal government has done this repeatedly throughout our country, and yet I'd be willing to bet that 99% of people have no idea that the federal government goes through this process of taking control, and their primary way of doing it, which is mentioned in this article, is they offer you money. They offer to help you, and before you know it, you're addicted to that money, and you start doing whatever they say, and then after a while it gets institutionalized and they're controlling the whole thing. And that's what the Department of Education done. You remember Reagan, he tried to get rid of the thing. Even Trump said that he would try to get rid of it. And
got 40,000 employees.
Yeah. And I remembered when I first heard about the Department of Education, I thought, what do we need that for? I mean, don't we already know what kids need to learn? Do we need some bureaucrats in Washington to tell us what we already know?
No, we need to send the politicians back to school. That's why we need it.
Well, as you read the article, you realized that the school curriculum was not really the issue. I mean, here I was naively thinking that they really wanted to educate the children so that they could be independent thinking citizens that could make decisions on their own and analyze information. And it turned out I was completely wrong about the whole process. And if people read that article in the Epoch Times, and it's a good read, it doesn't take you, 10 minutes to read the article. It's certainly worth reading. And one of the villains in the whole thing is one of my favorite villains, which is Billy Carter, President of the United States.
Jimmy Carter. Billy was his drunken brother. You've had too much Billy Carter beer. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. You're correct. Of course, it was Jimmy Carter. Maybe Billy would have done a better job. I don't know.
He probably would have.
Definitely, Jimmy was not a good president.
No. Well, when we've talked about the federal government and what they've got involved in or involved us in, and what are the results, and what are some shining examples, we usually talk about how they just destroyed the railroads, came in with Amtrak. It's never been the same since. But when you look at education, I think the most, and they even admit it by their own statistics, that of eighth graders, and you have core subjects, and we know their English and their math and science, of all the core subjects, 2/3 of eighth graders aren't proficient in even one. That's a staggering statistic.
And how are they going to develop the awareness to lead our country out of very complicated matters where there's so many lies being told, and evidence given and theories given that are completely false? I wanted to mention something I saw this morning when I was just looking for stuff to talk about today. There's an outfit called Campus Reform. Have you ever run across them?
No.
Well, they do that man on the street scenario.
Oh, I've seen them. Okay.
Yeah. And this one was appropriately about the 4th of July. And they went out very early in the week and started asking college kids questions. So the first, now, to be fair, I'm sure a lot of kids answered these things correctly, but some of the answers were so scary, you wouldn't even think that they'd ever gone to school at all. So the first thing they asked, which was a difficult question, is what is the 4th of July 4th about? Most of them had no idea what it was about. And they, even with some hints, they had trouble remembering that, in fact, the 4th of July is about the Declaration of Independence that was signed on July 4th of 1776. Now, I'm not that great on dates. I can goof on the dates, and so I'll give anybody a pass on dates. But when they were asked what the year the Declaration of Independence was signed, a disturbing proportion, no joke, said sometime in the 1970s.
The 1970s.
Yes, that was when we got our freedom. And my favorite answer of all was when they were asked, what country did the United States get its freedom from? Some of them said America.
I wish I could say I'm surprised. I'm not.
Right.
Because
right.
It has not been taught in school, in elementary school. I know when you and I went to school, of course, you were in a different state, but we had civics, we had government, we had Americanism versus communism. We studied these. We talked about them. It was our parents fought in the Second World War, and our grandparents some in the First World War. So it was a predominant subject of how fortunate we are to live in this country. Now I think a lot of kids growing up thinking we have a horrible country from what they see from the media.
Well, the one thing they all knew was that America was a racist country.
Sure.
They all knew that. That was the one thing they were sure of. The last thing, which is small, was that they asked them what the name of the war was. And the answers given among them were the French Revolution, World War II, and the Civil War. I was truly laughing. I should have been crying probably, but I was laughing when I watched it. And these were not little kids. These were college kids.
Well, in this article in the paper, it explains how we get to that point. Because in 1932, there was a book, Toward Soviet America, by the Communist U.S. Party leader, William Foster. And his goal, he said, was a United States Department of Education that would eventually replace patriotism and Christianity in schools with communism and globalism. That pretty much sums it up.
The thing that's truly astonishing, that's not a secret doctrine that's kept behind a safe that only the few can see. It's not classified information. They actually publicized what they were going to do and then did it. Truly remarkable.
Well, didn't Khrushchev say, we will bury you without a shot, without a weapon? We will destroy you from within. And I think we're seeing it today. And I don't think, now I'm a numbers guy. I love to play around with numbers and math. And I just think everything is mathematical, Bob. You have a population, you have a certain number of people in that population. And when it gets out of balance, just like the Hacking the Truth logo, when you have the scales there, when it gets out of balance, what does it take to correct it? Well, to go the other way. The problem we have is our population and the indoctrination of the population and the growth of the population is so far on the other side. I don't think it'll ever get balanced again because we've created welfare systems where millions of people are born into and never leave, white and black. They're not educated. They've just outnumbered us, and I don't think we're going back. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm just a realist. That's my opinion. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, the one thing when you look at the different theories, the cyclical theories of what's going to happen in the future, it's a little scary because there's There's any number of them, but some of the most popular ones are the fourth turning series of generations and the Kondratiev super waves, super cycles and waves that is based largely on economic factors, and the other one, of course, is psychological. And then there's just simply the theory of empires, and all three of them very strongly point to a very dark period in our history that's coming up within the next 20 years. And what's pointed out is that it's not necessarily that we're going to fail, but we're either going to have a big failure or we're going to have a big success and a rebirth. Right now, a rebirth looks pretty slim. It's losing wind and is 10 yards behind the leader, but still it is a possibility. It's not cooked. You never know. A new generation may arise in the next 20 years that will tip the scale back the other way. I certainly hope so. But my point is that even if we get the darkest one, you can still survive in that. Millionaires are made in the Great Depression. Businesses flourished in the Great Depression. It can be done. It's not time to give up, but it's time to certainly get your act together, practice self-discipline, learn what's going on, and do the best you can to help yourself and your family.
Well, I agree with all those things. I would like to see them happening more. Maybe they are, and I'm just not aware of it. I see it in some communities but I see the other communities who take more than they give, and this is what I'm talking about. If you truthfully add it up, and we'll take black, white, Hispanic, whatever welfare system, illegals coming over, getting on the welfare system, how much they've taken from the system and how much they've put into the system, the negative deficit is amazing. You throw in not only the money they get, but also the crimes committed, and not all. Some break out of the cycle of poverty, do a great job, but there's such a high percentage in America of the people who take more than they give. When that, truthfully, is more than 50%, how are they going to be supported, and will that start the revolution?
Actually, you just did a good job summarizing the empire cycle. When the empire starts to fall, the two things that you mentioned, extensive welfare was one of them, especially when it becomes an expected entitlement, like a property right. It's not something you get that can be taken away. It's yours, and no one can take it away from you. And that's very much, I believe, the way people look at it. And I think, have you noticed just recently that people are starting to talk about minimum incomes for everybody again?
Oh, I have.
Yeah, take advantage of any calamity, any disaster, and use it to push things that under normal times could never be pushed. I think you and I have mentioned that about 1,000 times over the years. And they even say they're going to do that, and people still fall for it. That's the thing that amazes me the most. All this information is right out there to say, we're going to do this. Every time there's an emergency, we're going to ram something down your throats and you're going to like it. We go, okay.
Well, we've grown into generations now that they get their information. I call them flatliners because they look at flat screens all day. So the information they're taking in, they're making an immediate judgment. They're for or against it. I don't think they're open-minded at all, but the frightening thing about it, they're making these judgments and they have no personal experience in this area whatsoever. Most of them are so young, they're still living at home probably with their parents, or they're 25 or 35 years old. How you think you're going to look at it when you're 50? Quite a bit different. But they don't have the experience. They'll run out into the streets. They'll do whatever they'll do. And it's mob rule. We used to have something that when a family member was out of line, one of our children would say, we'll give them some TL, meaning tough love. We're going to clamp down on you. You're not getting this. Now TL is Twitter lynching. You come out and speak the truth, and man, they just pile on because it's not what they believe in or want to believe in.
Well, there's definitely been a change of values. What you just mentioned, one of them, which is when we were kids, if something happens at school, we are automatically at fault.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, it's the teacher who's automatically at fault. What did you do to make this happen? How could you let this go on? All right, it's the teacher's problem, not the child. Once you brought up immigration, and when they were talking about the fall of empires, the important part about it is not the fact that there's immigration, because there's always immigration. It's that they stop assimilating. They do not adopt your culture. So there's conflict between cultures. And that's the sign of the fall of empire and to civilization. My goodness, look at Europe today. It's a disaster area. And, cities have no-go zones. Well, what better way to say we want no part of your culture and you can't come here? So that's definitely a major sign of decline. One of the more interesting ones was the change of heroes.
Hey, Bob, before we get into heroes, I do want to mention the Epic Times. I'm holding a copy right here, and you can go to epictimes.com. And I think for $2, they'll send you 3 weeks, 3 issues. I highly recommend it. And if you do that, please mention Hacking the Truth, that you saw it here. And just great, not only articles on what we're talking about today, but I do think the health section, the lifestyle section, some of the best I've seen. And we were talking, or you were starting to talk about heroes. So let's talk about heroes.
The most interesting thing to me is that a lot of the ways that you measure the decline and fall of a country are very complex. But there's a very simple one, and that's when the people that are looked up to, who are the heroes of society and culture, they change. In the beginning, when a country is strong and growing, their heroes are soldiers, builders, pioneers, and explorers. They're the people that go out there and accomplish great things. When a society starts to fall, and I thought this was a modern phenomenon, but they have actually traced it back to Rome, it changes. It goes to celebrities, sports stars, actors, musicians, and even people who are famous for being famous, the celebrities like the Kardashians and other folks like that. And if you ask people on the street today or kids who are their heroes, they're not going to name scientists or people that have done great things for the country. They're going to talk about their favorite pop stars, their favorite athletes. And unfortunately, a lot of those folks, their lifestyles are really best not copied, because they're pretty low levels in many cases. So if you really want to have a quick gauge of how a country is doing, look at its heroes, because they reflect the culture and how people look at the world.
Well, I believe these people become people who are admired for a number of reasons, but one of the other reasons is we get away from what truthfully problems we need to solve by watching sports, by watching movies, by escapism. And when you do this, you fill your time with that in the evening, afternoon, or all day, whatever you do. You get up the next day. To me, it's Groundhog Day. But you don't have to confront a reality of personal responsibility. And I think the personal responsibility is really lacking in so much of our population. You talk about heroes and knowing scientists. How are they going to know? They don't read books anymore. And if they're not getting it in school, they're certainly not getting it on the internet. So how are they going to know about these heroes?
True. And we remember when Rome fell, what was the response? Not fell, but when it was falling, the response was bread and circuses, welfare and entertainment. And we're just copying the Roman model.
Well, I'll give you
well for them.
No. I'll give you an example. And I'm all for capitalism. I'm absolutely a capitalist. Capitalism has raised more people out of poverty than any other system that's ever existed, and still offers more opportunity than any system that has ever existed. But when you start looking at salaries of people, and what we're paying them, what are we rewarding? Is it truthfully a contribution to society, or is it a sidebar of just relaxation and escapism? Patrick Mahomes, quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, great player, just signed a 10-year contract for $450 million. $45 million a year. Good for him. But what value we're placing on playing football, it astonishes me.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it in the way you presented it, but, they're mixing in materialism and consumption and making those virtues, and making lots of money throwing footballs around is now the virtue. The old ideas of self-discipline and self-sacrifice are no longer virtues. It's all about wealth and consumption. So, I just used to think of it as simply capitalism, but I can see how it hurts us as a country to glorify these folks.
Well, and the children, they become the children's heroes. And if you want to get out of poverty, you better be able to play a sport or be a singer or a rapper or something. It's not about getting an education or a skill and going to work. It's this fantasy land where, 1 in 100,000 will ever be a professional athlete, if it's that low. So what does that lead to? Dream shattered because it's not realistic.
Or, remember, it was often said before, don't quit your day job.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, yeah, you may want to try that, but please have a plan B and a plan C. But they don't.
Yeah, believe me, if you have that kind of talent, they've spotted it by the time you're in high school. It's not real hard to spot. And, you go play college football, you'll make it that way. But very few of those college players are going to be very highly paid professional athletes. It's not tons
and how
of
many,
them.
Yeah, and how many simply just get injured?
Yeah, I mean, we can go on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with musicians, singers. It's great if it's a passion and you want to do it, but get an education in the process, be it School of Hard Knocks. Be able to rely on yourself, and so many people cannot rely on themselves, are not personally responsible for their own well-being. So when whatever they're doing fails, they turn to illegal activity, drugs, whatever it is, to ease the pain of their own failure. That's the problem.
And many people turn to the government. We've talked before about the idea that when there used to be a major problem in society, the first question that was asked was, does the government have anything to do with it?
Yeah.
And now the question is, what will the government do about it? So it's changed. And if the future comes to pass that we think will, which isn't just our opinion, but based on these cyclical theories and the continuation of trends, the government is going to have trouble helping itself. And if you're going to survive in that world, you're going to have to learn to develop plans A, B, and C, because things aren't always going to go the way you want. Your ideal scenario is not always going to come through for you. So you have to have a backup plan, or as we say, don't quit your day job. Develop multiple skills, different ways of getting by in this world, and you'll survive, and you'll probably come out in good shape. At least I certainly hope so.
Well, there are things the federal government has taken over they should not even be involved in. It's not their role, but we never stopped them. There was no system of checks and balances. They shouldn't be in healthcare. They shouldn't be in education. They shouldn't be in transportation. I mean, it's you go on and on. This should come from the state level. The community standards are different in different communities.
Yeah.
But
I remember when they passed the Affordable Care Act, which we all call Obamacare, that people immediately said, if we don't stop this before a bureaucracy is formed, we'll have it forever.
And we do.
What? We do.
Well, we did a number of shows on that when we were on the air doing What's Your Opinion? And I read so much of that. I'm probably one of the few people in the country who did. And I pointed out at the time how confusing it was. You would read 2 or 3 paragraphs, read the next 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it was totally counter what the first 3 paragraphs you just read. It made no sense whatsoever.
And if I also recall, in that act, they set up various committees that would be in charge of X, Y, or Z with no limitations on the decision making they could make. So that when they passed it, it was completely open ended to be changed by these bureaucracies that they were going to establish. It was definitely a horror show. And one of the things that everybody needs to keep in mind is that when you read the summary of a bill and what it contains, you may read a quarter of a page or half a page, and that bill might be 1,000 pages long.
Oh,
And what
it's
you probably
amazing.
read, what you probably read was just a PR piece from someone in the government, and no one had really done what you did and actually dig into this and say, does this make sense? Does it contradict itself?
Well, there's a number of things. Before Obama was elected, he said any major legislation he would not rush through, that it would be out there for everybody to look at. There would be committees to discuss it. This got pushed through in about 3 days. And then Nancy Pelosi says, well, let's pass it and see what's in it. Well, Bob, I want you to buy my house, and here's a contract. Go on and sign it. Let's see what's in it. You ain't read it later. Go buy a car. You want to read the contract later. It's the stupidest thing I've ever, well, maybe not. I could probably come up with some more. But when I looked at it, and I said, by the time Obama's out of office, these guidelines and also the charges for the silver, the gold is going to double. And they exactly doubled, and people fled Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act because they can't afford it. And I found an interesting statistic. And I'll go back to one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, when asked about poverty. And he was talking about you got to be careful about giving people too much. He said poverty should be uncomfortable because then they're going to rely on you if you don't. And I'll just take this one thing on health care. Obviously, if you're at the poverty level, and in our state, it's about $26,000 for a family of 4. But you get $600 up to $660 a month on your SNAP card. That's $7,200. You get Medicaid, which you pay no medical care. And the average health cost for a family of 4 that's employed is $28,166 a year. And I could go on and on and on. It's amazing. I see why you don't want to get off welfare and you don't want to make more money, because you break that threshold, all that goes away and you've got to pay for it. I mean, Why not?
Well, and as we discussed earlier, part of the problem is that's a sign of a country in decline. And we're not saying, oh, this is America's problem. We're saying every time this has been tried throughout history to have an extensive welfare system, very shortly after that, there's been a failure of that culture or a decline of that empire. In many of them, it wasn't a matter of like a V-shaped recovery like they talk about with the stock market these days. It could have been hundreds of years before they actually got back to prosperity again.
Well, The Dumbing Down of America, the book, and I'm trying to see who it's by. What is her Department of Education? Her last name is Iserbyt, Iserbyt, and I think Elizabeth is her first name. I have not read the book. I'm going to get the book and read it. I should have gotten it a long time ago. And she talks about that and exactly goes into detail of what's happened. Now, if you have a dumbing down of the population, you have more of them who are going to stay where they are because it's not uncomfortable to be there. And I'm a numbers guy, as I said before, when these number of people are complaining there are no jobs for them or whatever, white, black, it's all races. But what are they going to do? What skills do they have if they can't? If 2/3 of them can't pass one core course in the 8th grade, what are they when they're socially promoted and even get out of high school? What job can they do, Bob? That's what's frightening to me. What are we going to do with these masses of people?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be a happy man. But what you're really saying is the cake is already baking in the oven. And we're just going to have to reap the whirlwind and deal with the issue. And it's going to be painful. We're saying in 20 years, according to all these theories, we have the potential for a collapse. But no matter what, there's going to be a very bad time. And I found it revealing the three major ways of looking at the world and measuring what will happen all came up with the same answer. And some of them are like the Kondratiev ways. Not every economist agrees with them. Probably most of them don't. But that guy was a Russian economist who got sent to jail because he disagreed with the Marxist view of history. So he was pretty sure of it, and actually has been a better predictor than most economists. One of the things we often talk about is you can't rely on experts. They often have an axe to grind. For example, they almost never predict recessions. And why? Because most of them are working at universities that their salary is paid by a grant from the federal government, or they are actually government economists. So they're not going to predict a recession. Their job security would probably be in jeopardy if they did.
Well, as far as experts, X is an unknown quotation, and spurt is water under pressure. That's about what it is. I don't trust them.
Yeah.
But I think what we're talking about, not only with the education of young people and the population in general, we have something called the internet, which is, I think, a vast resource of information at your fingertips if you use it. And that's the question. Do you just read it and forget about, or do you hack the truth on it? Do you dig deep into it? Do you look at it with an open mind and want to find some answers and some truth without accepting carte blanche just what you see? That's when you have an educated populace. I think we just moved so far away from it.
Yeah, if you don't change your mind on a regular basis and see, I didn't really quite understand what was going on there, I have a better idea of it now, you're not looking. If you think you know all there is to know, then you're blind. You can't hear. You and I learn new things constantly in all the exploration we do. And sometimes one of the fun things of working with you is that I now know a lot about aliens, right? And it's much deeper a subject than you think at first blush. It's not just a matter of guys flying around in spaceships. It's really much deeper than that. And one of the things that you brought up, which just fascinates me the most, is there was that you mentioned the book that was written about how they were going to take over education. The communists would take over education. And that is not hidden. It's not in a vault somewhere. And, we talked before about the rules for radicals by Solominsky. I mean, here's the guy saying, this is what we're going to do to you. I mean, nobody pays attention. The thing gets published a whole bunch of times. Nobody's paying attention, saying, well, let's look for signs of that. I never hear about that by any government official.
Or the news readers that you see on the newscast, and they're not investigative reporters anymore. They're getting paid a lot of money basically to read a teleprompter, and that's all they do. They're getting paid their $10, $12, $20 million a year. You think they're going to rock the boat? Not at all.
No.
And so you can forget the media as being your source. That's out the window. And most newspapers are owned by 6 corporations in America. And that's why I say the Epic Times, at least take a look at it. You'll get a different viewpoint, whether you agree with it or not, but it's a different viewpoint.
Remember the TV show, The X-Files?
Oh, absolutely. I have the
That was
well.
one of
We
my
used to have the poster behind us, but we don't right now.
Yeah, I was in love with Scully, I must admit.
Yeah.
But one of its motto was the truth is out there, and it really is. I know some things are hidden, but so much, if you look, you can find it. And you can't rely on experts. You can't rely on press clippings and things like that. You've got to dig a little
Well, you do have to dig. And I think that's part of the exciting thing about if you can be open minded, because then you start to discover more. I've often said, when you're young, you think you know everything. I mean, we're all in that same boat, or we're so smart. And I always looked at it like, okay, here we're going to this point, and we get to the top of the mountain, and we think we know everything, and then all of a sudden it does this. The triangle reverses, and we're down here, and all of this out here, we realize we don't know a whole lot about this subject that we thought we did, because now, by the time we get up here, we have some personal experience that goes along with the intellectual capability we have. And it's like, oh, I don't think I know everything about this subject. It's like reading a book on how to fly a jetliner, but actually flying a jetliner may be a little bit different.
That's true. I guess I have to stop reading books on golf and get out there and play more.
Well, that's one thing that never changes. No one will ever shoot 18. I will guarantee you that.
That's true. And
well, yeah, go ahead.
We just had the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would suggest that people just consider doing, get a copy of the Declaration of Independence and read what our complaints were as in the colonies against the King of England, and see how many of those complaints are actually facts today.
It will coincide greatly. It really will.
You realize the very things our forefathers rebelled against and were willing to jeopardize their lives and fortunes for, we accept with ease today. And even to a much greater degree because they lack the ability to interfere like big business and governments can interfere today.
Oh, most definitely. I think the crisis we truly have in the country today is spiritual, moral, and intellectual. And we really need to address that. And I do believe it starts with the education of the citizens and the education within your family. Because if you don't do that, Bob, it doesn't make any difference what laws there are, who's in control. If you don't have the intellect and the knowledge to oppose that, you're just sheep. And that's what we're becoming.
And it's going to have to be a grassroots movement. It's going to be one person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. And I don't see any other way that this thing, the war of words and war of political ideologies can be won. And as I've mentioned many times before, to me, there's only two ways of looking at politics: the people that want to control you and the ones that want to leave you alone.
Well,
and I'm definitely on the side of being left alone. I don't care what name you call it.
Yeah, if you're tolerant of other people's views and will listen to them and not shout them down, and we've talked about truth, and I'll end with this, or we'll end with this, rather than living in a divided mind, this is good, this is bad, yes or no. And Justin and I talk about this quite a bit. Justin's on our board over there, and board of directors too. Let's say truth is here. Truth is at the top. Falsehood is here. Rather than getting on either side of it, if you'll listen to someone, we'll just say, for argumentative sake, on the left, and this is the right, there may be 20% of truth in what they're saying, and you may have 10%. Or they may have 50%, you have 60%. But there's some truth, I think, in what everyone says if we will listen. We don't have to totally agree with it, but at least take it into consideration, their point of view. But that's getting stomped out, and that's very, very dangerous.
Right. When we cease to think we have any common ground, we have very few opportunities available to us to get together and find solutions to some very big problems that we're going to have. I agree with you completely.
Well, we got some big problems tomorrow, Bob. We're playing golf, so we'll see how we do.
Ah,
All right.
good.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'll see you next time on Hacking the Truth.